Hello and welcome to Epicenter. No ambiguity, no noise. Let's come straight to the point. In recent days, Iran has been gripped by a series of mass protests that have gained international attention. These protests, largely led by women, are somewhat unprecedented. While both protests and women's participation in protests in Iran is not anything new, the protests of the past couple of months are remarkable as the first of such scale led by women and totally directed at Iranian regime. The protests began in response to revelation that an Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, had died in custody of the nation's morality police, an arm of the Iranian government that is responsible for enforcing religious law in the country. Amini had been arrested for refusing to wear a hijab, a head covering worn by Muslim women to conceal their hair. The precise circumstances of Amini's death are unclear. The Iranian government maintains that she died of a heart attack while in coma at a hospital in the capital city of Tehran, but protesters and critics forcefully argue that she was in a coma as a result of beatings and torture endured while in police custody. Protests have been spreading and growing in size across Iran, a common sight being that of women burning their hijabs, dancing in streets, and calling for freedom and death of the supreme leader. The government has responded severely. Journalists reporting on the protests have been jailed. Hundreds of Iranian women have been beaten in the streets and arrested. And Iranian security forces, when I have been researching about it, about 2 weeks ago, I have the number from 2 weeks ago from Norway based Iran Human Rights NGO, and they have claimed that 326 people have since died in nationwide protests. And this is a number 2 weeks ago. Afghanistan's universities, at the same time, have also become a hotbed of resistance to the Taliban, with female students staging protests against the terrorist group sweeping restrictions on women. In response, Taliban has done what Taliban can do. It has cracked down on several university campuses across the country, violently breaking up demonstrations and expelling students accused of political activism. In the latest incident, the Taliban beat dozens of female students who staged a rally on October 30th outside their university in the northeastern province of Badkhashan. The incident came after a group of women were barred from entering the campus because of their appearance. Weeks after seizing power in August 2021, the Taliban now has imposed a new dress code and gender segregation for women at universities and colleges in Afghanistan. The Taliban's education ministry has ordered that all female students, teachers, and staff must wear an all encompassing burqa or an Islamic abaya robe and niqab that covers hair, body, and most of the face. Classes must also be segregated by gender or at least divided by curtain. Female students must be taught only by other women. This is full implementation of Sharia that is meant to keep girls out of classrooms. What is really happening? There is discontent in the Islamic world. This is the least we can say. Lack of reform, refusal to assimilate, and refusal to accept modernity, not to be confused with westernization, is causing protests, repressions, and restlessness in Islamic societies across the world, as we have seen in Iran and Afghanistan and everywhere else. What is different, though, is it's the women who are leading these protests. Where are the men? What are they doing? And can women bring about a change? Can women win this impossible battle? To talk about all this, we have a guest who has been a leading voice in voicing all these concerns about Islam in India. Being born in a Muslim family, this hasn't been easy for her, but she has persisted. My guest today is irrepressible Arshia Malik. Arshia is a teacher, writer, radiographer, and outspoken observer of life, death, war, conflict, terrorism, and the great game. She is a prolific writer, and I have been reading her columns and blogs for a long time, as you should too. Welcome to the show, Arshia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Namaste, Adab.
Namaste.
Hello
Namaste.
to everyone.
We have known each other for so long and we've been sort of in conversations off and on, but this is the first time we're having one serious conversation about something that is so sensitive, and I'm glad we are able to host you on Epicenter.
Thank you.
Arshia, before we go, I gave a long prologue about what is going on in the Islamic world. We know all is not well. But before that, for the sake of our audience, I want you to give us a very brief background about yourself. You are a Muslim, you're of Muslim heritage. You were born in a Muslim family in Kashmir. And tell us how you got here, which because this is truly not something that is expected of a good Muslim woman.
I am often asked this question, so it's not surprising it's coming again. My formative years was spent in Delhi. My dad was the manager at JK House, and I'm sure many viewers must be knowing that the location is spectacular in New Delhi. You have the bhavans from all sides, like you have the Gujarat Bhavan, the Maharashtra Bhavan. I opposite is the Bihar Bhavan, and then you had the Vatican Embassy, the American Embassy, the Sri Lankan Chinese Embassy. So I've grown up in diplomatic enclave. I was at a very early age exposed to various cultures around the world. But as happens in Kashmiri politics, due to some change, which people know now by now, 1984, my dad got transferred back to Srinagar. And for me, that was a culture shock there. 1985, I mean, people were not that exposed to geopolitics. People were not that exposed to fluency in language. I think Islamization was still at the horizon, but it's a conservative society. I mean, it's always been a conservative society. So for me, it was kind of a culture shock. But slowly, we had a very liberal family. My family was a very liberal one. They believed in giving books to daughters. I'm sure they regret it now, but I grew up among books, and books have always been there for me. They're still there. Uh, so this worldview that I have today, this outspokenness, it was always there since my childhood, and I have a very strong sense of fairness. I believe that unfairness should be called out. Since I'm prolific with the pen, I'm more of a thinker than a speaker. Writing comes very naturally to me. I think when I write, and thinking and writing goes together. Uh, I was not always so vocal because we didn't have any avenues
Yeah,
apart from male, uncles and cousins constantly shutting you down, and
yeah,
then the atmosphere, the tehreek as we call it, the kind of things that we saw and we couldn't speak out. There was no avenue to get the stories out. But luckily, technology, social media, and I got platforms and I could form my own blogs, and I could, as I was writing in my diaries, now I could publish it online, and that's how I've reached where I am today through my pen.
yeah. Absolutely.
That's the answer to your
Absolutely.
question.
More power to pen, and it might sound cliched that pen is stronger than the sword, but it is.
Mightier
But
than
it's
this one.
fine. Pen is definitely mightier than the sword, and that's how we know you. And I didn't use the word that people normally use for you, firebrand and rebel, because I don't like those words used for women, Ashia, because I think those also come from a place of condescension, because men are if you talk about men who are, they are visionaries and they are forward looking, but women are rebels and women are firebrand, so I don't like those words. So I am only going to use the word thinker for you, because I think you are a thinker and you are a sensitive thinker, and you're not doing anything that should be considered rebellious, because why is asking for fairness a rebellious thought? Why is a well-read woman a rebellious thought? But anyway, we'll leave it there.
In Muslim culture, if a woman just happens to speak out, it becomes rebellion because we are not supposed to be seen or heard. Remember that. Majority Muslim culture is like that. So for me to be seen the way I am and to be heard the way I do and to be read the whatever I write, that's already rebellious, and
Yeah,
hence the firebrand thing.
yeah,
I don't mind being called that. I have myself said I have very radical views regarding reform, and for that I'm very firm. The kind of solutions that I have, people do think that they are very radical.
yeah.
So I don't mind. I've adopted all labels that people have given me. Intifada Factory used to call me an insignificant teacher. I've adopted that very proudly. So I am not boxed in labels. I am
Yeah,
much more than those labels.
absolutely.
It's up to people to see if they want to, adopt my views and read my views.
Yeah. Ashia, where you're standing right now, What do you view? What is happening in the Islamic world, and what are women doing in Iran and Afghanistan? Why do you think it has come to this point now, finally, where they're burning their hijabs, they are protesting, and they're saying death to Iranian regime? Why do you think it came to this point?
I think it was always going on because I've constantly been reading as I came on social media. I started connecting with the women across, men across the Muslim world. As you said, we were discussing earlier that these primitive blogs started coming up, and I came to read about. If you see my pinboard back there, these are all cases of Muslim people killed. Avijit Roy is there, Raif Badawi's Thousand Lashes are there, and this I used to be friends with Yamin from Maldives. All of it date wise has been put up there. And 2012 is the time that I started coming across all these cultural Muslims and agnostic Muslims and atheist Muslims and all sorts of Muslims who were speaking about what today has become the term Islamo-traumatization, their experiences within Islam. And one thing was common: they were being silenced, and I'm very familiar of being silenced. uh, my own husband, if you read him, he was a writer, he was a journalist, and all of his writings are about being choked because you can't speak your mind in the Muslim world.
Yeah.
So, as I started researching Afghanistan, I believe the women were already defying the regimes there, the Taliban. Iran turned out to be surprisingly very forward because they had this Marxist literature, and Marjani Satrapi's book was one, Persepolis, which showed me that side of Iran. Eventually, Azhar Nafisi was recommended by somebody reading Lolita in Tehran, and I found myself in that book. And I think the women have always been defiant in societies that try to suppress them. Afghanistan's high point came when Farkanda was lynched to death in Kabul. Everybody must remember that case, on a false allegation of blasphemy, because that's the easiest way to silence women. Just say that she has insulted Islam. What I that iconic photograph is still with me. The women holding up her bier, taking her to the funeral graveyard, and not allowing the men to come forward. People should remember, in Islam, women are not allowed to go into the graveyard. I cannot visit my husband's grave. I had to rely on an ex-student to get a photograph of the grave because I was not permitted to enter. So I cannot have those graveside conversations with him. It's forbidden. But those women, they picked up her coffin. They One of the men helped them for digging the grave, but that's all that he was allowed to do. And they did the Fatiha and they did the prayers for her. It
Yeah.
was a protest against the male society in Kabul that you dared to lynch, a stone a woman to death. Her bloody face and all is there. So defiance has always been there in Muslim society. And today also, with the Taliban's diktats and everything, women are actually taking out protests, knowing that they'll be shot to death. Same thing in Iran. If you read the literature over the years, this disgruntlement, this resentment was just boiling below the surface because Iran has these mutawain, the morality police, the Basij. And I heard about the notorious Evin prison. I've read accounts of women there. Uh, Women still would defy the Basij. They would, throw off their scarf and be arrested and taken to the notorious Evin prison. In Evan prison, the guards assault these women because of Khomeini's Green Book, which says that a woman, cannot be allowed to die, and since she should not enter heaven, so they assault her. You know, and that is going on. I think Masih Ali Nejad is the face of the defiance in Iran. And as you mentioned, Masha Amin actually became the trigger for these protests to come out in the streets. But women have always been protesting, always. Azhar Nafisi is reading Lolita in Tehran. She started a reading group in a room. This was her protest of this banning of books in Tehran University,
Yeah.
censorship in Tehran University about the curriculum and what to read and what not to read.
We will talk about lack of allies for women who are protesting. We will get to that in a minute. But I want to spend a minute on hijabs first of all. It is so funny to me and it is so ludicrous to me that while women are dying because they want to take off hijab in places like Iran and Afghanistan, in liberal democracies like United States and India, where you're free to do what you want to do, nobody is stopping you from anything, they are actually wearing hijab, they are promoting hijab, feminists are promoting hijab, and there is a World Hijab Day apparently. And when you ask them, they give you this false choice. They say, well, we are not, we are, hijab is also a symbol of choice. How can hijab be a symbol of repression in one place and a symbol of choice in another place? Why are these mixed messages being given? And how are you supporting women who want to take off this yoke of slavery, which is on their head, and now by telling them, oh, it's a choice? So a woman fleeing from Afghanistan or from Iran or from any other place where hijab is mandatory now comes to a liberal society, and all these liberal women and feminists are telling them, well, it's a choice. I mean, how can hijab be both? Tell me about this hijab thing. I have scratched my head and I just cannot understand.
In 2015, I started writing for a Pakistani portal. And this was the time when Nike started putting their, swoosh on they started getting out this burkini, making it very fashionable. And, Ilhan Umar was just on the horizon. Dalia Mujaddid was there. Linda Sarsar was there. Sarsar. And it was suddenly very fashionable, especially that picture of the American flag, the US flag in a hijab. That got to me. And I explored this in my hijab article in The Nation. It's still up there. बीच में वो लोग उसको expunge कर देते हैं, but it keeps coming back. And I wrote about Western women carrying water for Islamists. It's not my term. This is Ayan Hirsi Ali's term, carrying water for Islamists. Because of the regressive left. The regressive left in their postmodernistic, views, trying to bring cultural relativism to everywhere, saying that all cultures are equal, and the white guilt that they have because of the fascism that they've had to deal with 1940s post World War, something they want to clean off. And I could see that the Western feminists were actually enabling these Islamists by saying that hijab is a symbol of choice. I wrote that article saying hijab is not a symbol of choice; it's a symbol of oppression. Because even if one woman in the world is coerced into wearing it, it doesn't become a choice. Secondly, if you're conditioning little children, little girls from the age of 6, 5 to wear the hijab, it is not a choice. Thirdly, if somebody doesn't want to wear it and you actually slut shame them, it is not a symbol of choice then. So all of the things, but then the hassles, the hazards that we face, reformers face, outspoken women face, especially who want to defy this hijab diktat. It's the left liberals basically. As I said, cultural relativism, wanting to appear secular, constantly coddling the Muslim community. It's actually bigotry, soft bigotry of low expectations. They don't expect the Muslim world to modernize, to evolve, and constantly coddling them because of a misplaced sense of unfairness,
Yeah.
right? One thing that the Iran protests did, they actually brought the plight of the women to the forefront. If you see, the protest started before Masha Amini's death. Also, that iconic picture of a woman waving the white scarf
White
in the
scarf.
face of the mullahs, that's an iconic picture.
Yes.
And she was then she's a young mother. She had a baby, I think, and she was taken to Evan prison. So
Yes.
that was when the whole discourse started, even in India. That how can it be a symbol of choice? And what about the girl? Why is she taken to prison? So this whole national and international discourse started.
No, you're right. As long as there is even one woman who is being forced to wear anything, who is being forced to wear hijab, it cannot be a
It's not.
symbol of choice at all. I think these are false choices.
in
But
in
that,
Kash-
Yeah,
In
go ahead.
Kashmir, I was personally witness to the diktat by the Duktarane Millat, Asya Andrabi. She's a terrorist.
Yeah.
And she had all these diktats, and women were actually acid attacked. And they were kneecapped. Kneecap is when you put a bullet to the knee, you end up handicapping the person. You don't kill her because of wearing jeans, just because they were wearing jeans. So, we had this diktat that we had to cover and then women become very creative also. They started getting these designer abayas and designer niqabs and designer. Women hamesha wo karti hain. But they defied. We used to defy it. Anywhere we saw, we wouldn't cover it. I have never covered myself, even in the 90s. The only day I wore a veil was on my wedding day. That's the only day. I was accepted by my family, my father-in-law. Aisa kuch nahi tha.
But
But,
since you talked about Kashmir, let me talk about, since
yeah,
we are both from Kashmir and we both know Kashmiri
happen to be
society.
from the same
Happen
neighborhood.
to be from the
That
same
was a very
neighborhood.
pleasant
Yes.
surprise.
So we just have to talk about Kashmir. I will come back to the broader topic in a minute. But you and I both have seen, I grew up in Kashmir. I did not know. I will tell you my experience, and then correct me if you think wrong. My experience was older women sometimes when they used to किसी कहीं पे जाती थी किसी के घर, then they used to wear those black robes, black, what was it called? That burqa, black burqa, or it was white. Sometimes it was white. It used to be a skirt-like thing that you used to wear.
Shuttlecock. We call
Yeah,
it the shuttlecock burqa.
वो या तो white पहनते थे या black पहनते थे.
Mm.
That was the thing, and this was older women. Younger women had stopped wearing,
Totally.
totally, teenagers and younger women, they had totally stopped wearing. In maybe in rural areas you would find a lightly, they would cover their head with a dupatta. Sometimes शादी जब
Yes.
नई हुई होती थी, they
हाँ.
would put a dupatta on their head, but hair was not covered or anything. But in cities, I never saw any young woman wearing hijab. तो सवाल ही पैदा नहीं होता था. That
नहीं.
hijab, niqab, I have never seen in Kashmir. Then this is just what, 30 years ago we have not seen that. That younger girls, as in little 5-6 year old girls in niqab, is in hijab, is a sight that if somebody had told me that 20 years later I will become Miss Universe, and or somebody had told me that a 5-year-old girl in Kashmir will wear hijab, I would have believed the former. Although both were so, because I would have never believed it. But today,
This is true. This is true. My grandmothers, both of them, paternal and maternal, they used to. It would be a holiday thing. It just shows what is there in the trunk, and they would take out these shuttlecock burqas and they say we used to wear it, and now we don't wear it. Now it's a rural thing, and ab nahi pehante hain. Grandmother used to narrate these experiences of going to the Friday prayers in the mosque to hear the khutbah, the sermon. And since women are allowed at the back, and she's the only one, she said that's the time I used to go wearing that shuttlecock burqa. So it had become a relic. By the time the diktat came in 90s, there was this rush to the tailor and everybody. We were like surprised, ki, what is this? I mean, because practically the traditional dress of Kashmiris that we have, we tie our hair, that Turkish style, because all of our women mostly used to work in the fields. If you work in the field and you bend down, you cannot have a nakab or something. It was just some of us headscarf that used to tie at the back, and then of course the adornments and the jewelry that we have. So that's not our traditional dress. But as we can explore Abhi in the discussion, 1979 post, the three events that happened in the Muslim world, especially the Soviet Afghan jihad, the Wahhabization through petrodollars, the export of that, it was bound to take up Kashmir in its wake. And that's what happened. The Wahhabization of Kashmir.
yeah.
Eventually, the terror groups trying to, the Islamofascism, closure of cinema halls, closure of beauty
First,
salons,
first thing I remember, they said that all salons will close. I remember it
closed.
like that. So
That's the
all
first thing. They
salons,
used to put pamphlets on, electric poles and gates and
yeah. So
In
also
fact,
the
sent a personal threat to the woman operating the boutique or the beauty parlor.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
And
that's true.
then Duktrane Milat, Asya Andrabi came and she was all covered and all you could see were her eyes. And that was such an alien sight in Kashmir. Who had seen a
Yes.
woman like that ever?
No.
Nobody had ever seen a woman like that ever. No Muslim woman was dressed like that. So she was, what was she bringing to Kashmir? Arab Islam? What kind of Islam is this? Because before Asya Andrabi happened to Kashmir, people were still Muslims. It's not like they
Yes.
were not Muslims before
Absolutely.
that. It's not like
Since
they were,
centuries.
yes. So people were still Muslims. So what brand of
In fact, we
Islam?
had a better version, I believe, because we were influenced by Nund Rashi and Laldad,
Yeah,
Kashmiri Shaivism had a place in my family as well. They used to talk
yeah.
about it. And Kashmiri Shaivism is an amalgamation of, the best in Hinduism and the best in Islam, Sufistic Islam. So
Mhm.
that Kashmiri Shaivism influence was there as well. We
So
had no
the
issues,
version of Islam that Dukrane Millat brought was clearly Wahhabization, Wahhabi Islam.
yes,
So if it
yes.
was Wahhabi Islam, then it was clearly traveling. It traveled all the way from Saudi Arabia. Why did it get successful? Why do we see Wahhabization? Why was Wahhabization successful?
That's one answer for that is Pakistan. Since 1947, there is this narrative which has been distributed through the MUF, the MUF, all the activists of the Jamaat Islami, the Maududi kind, and all their chapters, whether it is the Islamabad chapter, whether it is the Mirpur chapter, whether it is the London JKLF headquarter chapter, or whether it is the Mysuma chapter, all cadres of the Jamaat Islami were distributed, all over Kashmir. So combined with the Wahhabi preachers from Deoband who were coming there in the 90s, following the funding by the petrodollars of Saudi Arabia, plus this underlying narrative that Kashmir ought to be with Pakistan. And everybody must have studied by now how Zia's Islam in Pakistan eventually took over. So these were two combining factors. Even the moderate Muslim, Kashmiri Muslim felt that, nay, maybe we are not following the correct Islam, right? Totally forgetting what the grandfathers had taught them, and Shai Hamdan and all the Sufis. Then satellite TV, everything has its pros and cons. Zakir Naik started getting broadcast into our living rooms. So that hard radical interpretation of the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sirah and everything. I think it was a combination of all these factors.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what I generally call the intifada factory. जैसे कि आज disinformation चल रहा है, उस time पे तो we were not even connected, right? Remember, trunk call का जमाना था. No Facebook, no social media, not even a mobile. Just satellite TV had just started coming in.
Yeah.
So that time being totally disconnected from the world and disconnected even from India because we were under the conflict. So there was no way of knowing where this was coming from. What is all this? What is this new thing? So my late husband Arshad used to call it. It's like soda fizz, valvala. सोडा फिज में सबका वो जोश एंड जो भी डिस्ग्रंटलमेंट घर में थी, जो भी रिजेंटमेंट स्टेट के साथ थी, एवरीथिंग गॉट caught up in this.
Yeah.
It's like mobs. If you tell, like screaming fire in a theater, everybody rushes. So
Yeah.
this new thing was happening in which the pundits were being ethnically cleansed, neighbors were being called out, and these processions were coming on the streets for a memorandum in the UN, United Nations mein jana hai, memorandum dena hai. And 20 years later, we figure out nobody had even read those UN resolutions. Nobody knew what it was all about.
Yeah.
And, we were also, I was 15 in 1990 when this whole ethnic cleansing started. And then the Gurkha massacre happened. And that time, you just react that the state had actually killed protesters on the Gurkha bridge. And you start thinking maybe the state is wrong. How could this happen? But then it takes years and years to find out that this is a Pakistan sponsored proxy war against India. And it's not just happened in 1990, this has been going on since 1947. We come across Major Akbar's book. We
Yeah.
realize Zia's war room plans were there since 1965. We hear about Operation Gibraltar. We used to keep hearing about the Jammu massacre हुआ है, not realizing कि उसी time पे मीरपुर massacre भी equally हुआ था, and something that has been publicly acknowledged by the then Sardar Qayyum, I think, apologized to the Hindus.
Yeah.
So all of this campaign of, this narrative, which is still going on
Yeah.
right now. If you since you are in the US, Stand with Kashmir and all of
Oh
its
yeah,
branches, and
branches. Yeah,
Madar and the Fazlis and Tony Ashai and Mubin Shah and everybody. So this is it. I mean, the average Kashmiri who doesn't read, who doesn't study, doesn't have access to newspapers, he was bound to come up,
yeah.
इस लपेटे में definitely आने वाला था.
Absolutely. Although there are, we have seen a moderate face of Islam, as you have seen before 90s, but there are also studies, and that Islam did not spread in Kashmir peacefully. So all the, we had even on Epicenter, we have had guests who have done major research about this, that when Sufis came, when Iraqi, for example, came, when Iran came, I mean, for some reason, when they came, when they spread Islam in Kashmir, it may not have been with the gun, but it was because there were no guns at that time, but it was repressive for sure. Because how else would such wide spread conversions happen otherwise? Fully Hindu society, how does it become 95% Muslim? So it couldn't have been peaceful. Also, Kashmiri Pandits, although history doesn't record it, but Kashmiri Pandits in their history and mainstream textbooks don't record it, but in their history they do call this the seventh Exodus. So they do know that seven Exoduses have happened. They also know the reign of tyrants in the past,
Hmm.
the Butchikan and also.
Kuch करना.
So there has been a face of Islam in Kashmir, which was quite repressive for the minorities. It may not have been like that for women yet, but it was quite repressive. And because nothing was done, because minorities kept getting eked out. So what happens in Islamic societies? I have seen, Arshia, and correct me if I'm wrong. First, they go against any non-Muslim, then they go against the fault lines that they have against Sufis, against Shias, because Sunnis are hold the most clout in this Wahhabization. Then they go after, in Pakistan, they have gone after Ahmadiyas. They go after all this. In Afghanistan, they go after Hazaras. All these massacres that we see, and then finally we don't know what is the final product of Islam that is going to be. What do Islamic societies, what do Sunni societies talk about? Do they want a world that is totally Sunni men? I mean, how is that world even going to exist? That's what do Sunnis talk about? I mean, what is their worldview?
Let me come back to the rulers first of all, because this is something I'm also researching, because it affects me directly. The compilation of the Hadith, which happened 200 years, 2 centuries after the Prophet's last sermon. The Prophet's last sermon is very democratic, and by today's standards, because it keeps reiterating, treat your women well, and 2 centuries later, the Hadith are compiled, and there is something which is now being researched in the Muslim world called the Ulama State Alliance. The ulama are the clergy, and the state is, of course, always in the medieval times. They used to be caliphs with their own agendas and their political, holding of power and everything. And today, you can see the politicians like that. So this ulama state alliance was always there. If you see the Mughal history also, there have been experimentations by various emperors. Aurangzeb was a tyrant, definitely. But for us, Akbar is kind of a mild mannered one.
Mhm.
Had it been Dara Shikoh, maybe the history of India would have been different. So the same goes for Kashmiri history. You had Sultan Butchikan, defacing the effigies and actually throwing the Pandits out and killing them. But then at the same time, you also have Sultan Zainul Abidin, who actually invited the Pandits back. So this utar chadav of Islam is always going to be there. But the rebel rousers are always going to win. Why? Because they always have the might on their side. They always resort to brutality.
Mhm.
So Islam did come peacefully in a sense by the Sufis, same way as it came in the south through trade in South India, but
Mhm.
it came through invasions and conquests from the north, right? And since it's a valley, it's a very pleasant atmosphere to meditate. The Sufis found their way to it. So ye hota rahega. You will always find one person interpreting Islam in his own way, like Akbar had the Deen Ilahi, and then you have Aurangzeb, of course, going to the Wahhabized version of it,
Mm.
right? But it's true, because when we also started talking to pundits, remember 1990s, you had all left, so we had no idea what was happening to you. It was only through social media that we started connecting and talking to each other, and then we realized the intellectual giants in the Kashmiri pundit world started telling us there were 7 exoduses, and then going back to our grandfathers and grandparents and asking hua tha, and they were saying like yes, and we used to ask them, but you only told us stories about Butchikan, what happened to the others? So this thing, you're right. Nothing was done about it, and this narrative was not out there.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to talk about it. It's always suppressed under that Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb thing, right? Muslims are never encouraged to face their brutal past as well. They
Mm.
keep harping the glory of Mughal, but they never accept the brutality even.
That's what I say. Even in Kashmir, I mean, Professor Ken Pandit, I would really recommend his work to all the audience. And, he has worked very clearly on Persian manuscripts that Baristani Shahi that he found in Iran. He went to Iran and he found it. It's the Iranian people who have talked about Baristani Shahi and who have talked about what they have done to Hindus in Kashmir and
Hindus,
how
yes.
they were persecuted. So there are stories of persecution. But coming to, we don't want to spend our time.
Sunanda, this is the problem with Indian Muslim intellectuals also. Since I'm researching now, and I find, the Irfan Habib school of history totally whitewashed the brutal Muslim past.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get this book from Zia Barani in English, where he specifically again mentioned what was done to the
So
indigenous Hindu
somehow
population.
the Nehruvian consensus was that if you talk about this history, somehow you will hold the current Muslims responsible for it. It is like me holding you responsible for what Sikandar Butchikan did. That is
Which
preposterous.
was a
Why would I?
mistake. Which was a
Why would I
mistake.
do that?
Since this narrative was absent, this narrative should have been there. It should have been made very clear that the Muslim League is responsible for the creation of Pakistan,
Yeah.
and the Muslim League was the upper elite of Uttar Pradesh, who some of them migrated, but some of them did not migrate, stayed
Yeah.
back. Right? This should have been discussed so that the new generation would know how to deal with it. Today, they don't know how to cope with it.
Yeah.
I see it happening in forums all across, whether it's Clubhouse, whether it's Twitter Space, or whether it's Facebook, anywhere. They are being forced to come, to confront this truth that yes, the idea of Pakistan was by the Muslim League. And considering J. Sai Deepak's book, second book, has traced it back to Shah Waliullah, now,
Mm.
they're finding it all the more difficult to defend it.
Yeah.
That, this idea of Pakistan is just new. It just came from Iqbal. No, it was always there. It's just a manifestation, physical
Also,
manifestation happened in
uh,
1947.
I
And then
think.
again, the unfinished business of partition extended to Kashmir in the 1990s, starting from Zia's war room plans in 65. So this separatism, this constant separatism which is there, they needed to, the Nehruvian Marxist historiography. I mean, it did a lot of damage, at least to the Indian Muslims, and that
But
is what concerns me a lot.
separatism, let's discuss this a little bit. Where does this separatism come from? And I see the roots of it right from the beginning of Islam, because I feel that somehow the narrative in Islam is that religion above everything else, religion above culture also, because every place has its own culture, right?
Yeah.
So religion about culture, religion about reform, religion about anything else. So even though there is scholarship in Muslim world, somehow the texts have not been open to multiple interpretations, because you do there, a text is a product of its time, and then you interpret it according to the time you are living in and the place you are living in. There is something called desh or kal, so time
Mhm.
and place. So you have to interpret everything according to the time and place where you are, and that is what intellectuals are supposed to be. However, Islamic tests seem to be frozen in time. You are told that you cannot forget about non Muslims. Even Muslims are not supposed to interpret it. Muslims are not supposed to give it any modernist interpretation. And here we have to understand that not everything modern is westernized. We're not talking about westernization. Of course, there is, every place will have its own culture, but we're talking about modern, we're talking about egalitarian views, we're talking about respect for women, we're talking about equality that you said, we're talking about fairness. If all these are modern concepts, then somehow they need to be incorporated with Islam. Why is it that right now every non-Muslim is under the feeling that Islam and Muslims don't want to assimilate? They do not want to assimilate, they want to be frozen in time.
That's because the Muslim world committed intellectual suicide in the 12th century. So there was a time in the Muslim world where faith and reason were living together.
Hmm.
This is the time which is generally called as the golden age. I don't call it the golden age, it's a misnomer. It's the age of translation, when
Hmm.
Islamic intellectuals were inspired by the Hellenistic history. They took a lot from the traders and the merchants which are coming there in the Arab world, from Hinduism also, right? The Indic civilization. They took a lot from the Persian civilization. They took a lot from the Hellenistic, Aristotelianism, jisko hum kehte hain. So at that time, a lot of things were reinterpreted. We had the philosophers, and Ibn Rushd stands very tall among them, who did feel that there are certain things in the text which do not correspond to reason, and hence you need to reinterpret the text in a new way. This was allowed under the caliphs of those times.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, the Asharite, which is a literal interpretation of the text, they won over the Mutazalit. The Mutazalit were reasoning over text, which is, Ibn Rushd is the symbol of that. So the gates of ijtihad is a doctrine in Islam in which you can have consensus, you can all sit down together and reach a consensus where a solution can be found. They were closed in the 12th century. And from there to this point in time, the digital age, they have not been opened as yet. They are opening up now, which is when we'll come back, when we'll discuss reform. So this othering, this separatism is from the text itself, where the word kafir is literally interpreted as the infidel. Today they may be coming up with explanations. The clergy, the ulama always do this obfuscation, this obscurantism, that no, it doesn't mean that. It meant the Jew. It didn't mean this. But it's not going to wash anymore. In fact, Indonesia has already started working on its text where they are planning to abrogate kafir word, because Indonesia is a multicultural society, and they have stuck to their roots. They've accepted their Hindu past, their Buddhist past. If you see the symbols and everything, they're very, very Hindu, right?
Yeah.
And they have absolutely no issues with that. Indonesian nationalism is, they see themselves as Indonesians first and then Muslims.
Hmm.
So this is something that it's happening in many places, even in European Islam as well. In the migrants that have traveled, and now they are having these desegregated mosques, female qazis, a lot of revolution coming there. And they've realized that you cannot hold religion over anything else.
Hmm.
Because, as you said, different places will have different cultures.
Yeah.
So this interpretation of texts using reasoning, this was something that used to happen till the 12th century, but afterwards we committed intellectual suicide. Imam Ghazali responsible for it when he said all the philosophers are heretics and ought to be wajibul qatl, justified for murder.
Yeah.
Uh, but this is where the digital age comes in. It has been an ally, and we'll come to that when we discuss that.
Yeah. So my we were talking about women and Islam, and we already discussed that this left liberal world is not interested in them. I will tell you a recent, just yesterday, I was sort of looking at some articles. I was preparing for this episode. So I generally typed on Google women against Islam. Okay, is something I did. Women in protesting against Islam. First 3 pages are share. I don't know what your Google will show up, but my Google here, it showed up first 3 pages. Women actually supporting hijab. Women actually supporting this thing and going on this all this victimhood mode. That look, the first 3 pages of the article. Who goes to the fourth page of Google ever? Nobody goes even to the second page of Google. So this entire left liberal, this conspiracy of not talking about women who are actually protesting, about who are actually talking about how choked, using Arshad's word, choked. In
So
Islam, choke is such a powerful word. If they are feeling choked, where are the allies? Who are the allies? And who should they look up to? They cannot be winning this battle alone because they are not winning. Wahhabization is winning, if, when I see it from my point of view.
the regressive left is definitely not an ally because,
Yeah.
as I said before, in their cultural relativism and postmodernism, they actually started coddling the Muslims.
Mm.
The liberal, whether it is a Hindu liberal or a Christian liberal or any other liberal, is also not a friend because it's playing that soft bigotry of low expectations. These women who have started doubling down on the symbols of
One moment.
Islam.
You are saying that a Hindu liberal cannot be a friend for the simple reason the way Hindu liberals are brought is because they're not expecting Muslims to change.
The first person to protest what I say is almost always a Hindu liberal.
Mm.
Inevitably happens to be from Bengal, the left. It's always a Roy or a Datta or a Sen. Since I started talking, it's inevitably. I
Yes.
know it took me a decade to understand why this was happening because they wanted to, secure their secular credentials in front of whatever audience they had. They were worried about their likes, and I have a few names on my mind. Rajiv Tyagi comes to mind, Vistap Hudiwala comes to mind. They even had the temerity, the audacity to call Khalid Beg a house nigger. And for me, that was like, you cannot do that. Absolutely cannot. Not with me. You'll have to be answerable to me. So that's what I'm saying. The liberal who happens to be from Hindu heritage, he may be an atheist, right? And they're mostly atheist, leftists, but they'll be the first people to oppose me,
Mm.
saying that I am doing Islamophobia. Again, a misnomer created. I've written about it, I've tweeted about it. It's a word constructed to shut down debate in Islam, about regressive practices in Islam, about critique in Islam. The correct term should have been anti Muslim bigotry, which is, of course, a fact. It happens, but not Islamophobia. And I'm glad they came up with this term Islamo traumatized now, to counter Islamophobia term. So I think
Yeah.
that's a new word which is gaining. Coming back to it, what I said was the women have started doubling down on these symbols because, see, as an average woman who has just access to a few newspapers or a channel, and you have these agenda groups, the agenda groups I'm talking about, the disinformation campaign and everything, the alt news and the fact checkers, constantly giving you this perception that Muslims are under siege.
Yeah.
Secondly, that Muslims are oppressed all over the world, whether it's Palestine or Chechnya or Bosnia. They will bring up these old, historical events. And then saying that, as Muslims, since it's a tribal society, your main loyalty is to the tribe. And if you do not speak for the tribe, somehow you will not be a true Muslim, right? That's takfirism. And you will be disloyal to your tribe. So that is why these women have started doubling down. You saw it in the Karnataka hijab thing, which eventually turned out to be a PFI conspiracy, internal insurgency of India. So using these few girls and me constantly countering that information, these are just six girls out of 35. The others don't have a problem. They are Muslims. They didn't have any problem before 2021 December. Why did this suddenly come up? Please understand what is happening because we've seen it happen in Kashmir, right? Huh.
Totally.
So when to an average person these three things come to you, Islam khatre mein hai, Muslims are oppressed, you are under siege by the Hindus, the paranoia of Hindu subjugation. You are bound to double down on your symbols. You are bound to fight for something which gives you identity, however regressive it might be.
Yeah.
So
After
that
9/11, you talked about Islamophobia. Islamophobia was after 9/11,
I think a Western author coined it. In fact, he
yeah,
regretted it. He
yeah,
said, "I didn't realize it was going to be used in such a way."
yeah.
He retracted, but then Linda Sarsour made it very, very famous. And now I see this Khalid Bedoun coming up on Twitter. There is this person. He's written these books on Islamophobia in America, and now they are targeting India. That there is a lot of Islamophobia, and I am from the Muslim community. I am saying it's been constructed to shut down debate.
Yeah.
so that people, women like me, should not even speak about the regressive practices in Islam. And there are lots of regressive practices in Islam. There is this problem. Pehle to triple talaq was there, something that had been banned in Pakistan ages ago. We were still following that, which was very amazing for me. And then you have the muta marriages. Then you have other problems, especially now that this Jharkhand court and Haryana court have given this that women as young as 15 in Muslim families can marry. So these are regressive practices. And then, of course, you have FGM, which is not just an African, culture like Raza Aslan would like to explain away. This is happening in the Bora community in Bombay, right? In India.
FGM, for the sake of our audience who are not, is
Female
genital
genital
mutilation.
mutilation.
Female genital mutilation that
The apologists
girls
will
are.
say it's an African culture which has somehow simmered into Islam, but then if it has somehow seeped into it, why not speak up against it? Since Islam was all about reform, and the Prophet had wanted to take away Jahaliya when the daughters used to be buried in the sand. That's the stories which have come to us. So why not do it? You had ample time to create a consensus. Why not give a fatwa against it? Right? So Islamophobia is a misnomer. It's been just constructed to shut down debate.
Is there a version of Islam, Arshia, that can coexist with quote unquote kafirs? Is there any version of Islam that can coexist with kafirs? Where they
I,
are still accepted as Islam, they are still accepted as Muslims, they are still accepted as people of the book, and yet do you think they can coexist with infidels?
there are. It's not like we don't have syncretic Muslims or Indic Muslims, as we call them. Whether they'll be accepted is, again, Saudi is just starting to take back all its Wahhabi literature, which means eventually in a few years' time, all these preachers will be singing a different tune. They won't be practicing takfirism, who is not a true Muslim. But Indic Muslims are there, they have been coexisting. If you must have heard of the Mayo Muslims, then I've heard about the Tamil Muslims. I'm just starting to discover, Mangyar Muslims. These are Muslims with very Hindu rituals, and they have very Hindu names, and you wouldn't
Not
even believe
accepted
it.
by Muslim mainstream, but not
That's
accepted by Muslim mainstream. You are not accepted by Muslim mainstream, Ashia. So,
uh,
and you are not even any, you're not even anything close to what,
even APJ Abul Kalam is
yeah,
not considered
yeah,
Muslim. It's only for TV debates. He said, "लेकिन वो भी हमारे हैं." वो हमारे तब बनते हैं when there is a TV debate. You want to,
right,
prove a
right.
point.
So, because
Otherwise, not
no
accepted.
there
Arif
is
Mohammed Khan
no-
is not accepted as a
yeah,
Muslim, right?
yeah.
Acceptance is a different thing. Acceptance is, again, the gatekeepers of morality, the gatekeepers of this. Otherwise, if you really truly go into what the Sufistic version has come to us, they say it's between you and your God. You are nobody to say who's going to go to heaven or hell. In
Mm,
fact, even for blasphemy, there is no earthly punishment anywhere in any hadith. This is what the interpretations are telling us. This is what the new scholarship is all about. Ki you are nobody to decide that Salman Rushdie needs to be beheaded. You are nobody to decide who is to be killed for practicing whatever. I mean, the that shows a weak faith. That shows a very weak faith where you need to defend your religion by killing a room full of cartoonists and editors. That shows a very
can
weak
this
faith.
version of Islam, what you are saying, can this version of Islam ever become mainstream?
I think it can. Again, as I said, the digital age is our ally.
Yeah.
People kept messaging me, why is the title impossible? So I said, wait for Saturday and I'll explain. It would have been impossible a decade ago or
Yeah.
even a few decades ago. But the digital age did something for us. I would never have, connected with Yasmin Muhammad. She's written the book, fantastic book, Unveiled. I would never have, read about Raif Badawi,
Yeah.
right? This is a person who just got out of Saudi prison. He's written this book, Thousand Lashes. The Queen, of course, the Queen, Ayan Hirsi Ali,
Queen,
right?
absolute queen. Yes.
And right now, the face of the Iranian protests,
Yeah.
right? I
Masian.
would never have known about these women.
And
But
we
it's
would have
like,
never known you had this medium not existed. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the digital age is our ally, right? And I believe that now that we are coming up with these problems in the interpretation of Islam, where the kafir word is actually, it's being discussed in mosques, it's been discussed in various portals, that, this is an affront to Hindus, to Jains, to Christians, even. You cannot do that. As I said, Indonesia is already deliberating about it, whether we need to change it or not. I'm hoping that Indian Muslims always follow whatever the Arabs do. They want to copy it. And we are still under the sway of Fatwa Alamgiri. Of course, if you have politicians like Uwaisi, then, कहते हैं ना, फिर तो अल्लाह ही हाफिज है, right? It'll take time. For the Indian Muslims, it's going to take time because we already have our self-inflicted injury of the partition. It's the baggage that we will always have over our head until we don't start denouncing it, that we were responsible. The Muslim League was responsible, which unfortunately, as I said, our history books do not talk about much, right? But the digital age, the digital technology, the portals, they became our allies. There is an underground movement in the Middle East where they are questioning them. Like I said, Rev Badawi, very important person. He's just the face of the underground movement which is going on, and which forced the Saudi kingdom to think about, reform. They allowed Manal Sharif, she's an activist in Saudi, because of which women were allowed to drive, right? Cinema halls have started opening up. And then the Kashmiris had no argument why there were no cinema halls. I mean, I said, you're protesting the Kashmir files. Why don't you protest the fact that there is no cinema hall at all? उसके बाद बोल लेना कि वो फिल्म है कि नहीं है, but cinema hall ही नहीं है, right? So this is it. That digital age. Today, we can pick up a video and show them this is a woman protesting on the streets of Kabul against the Taliban. She is telling them they need to go to school. Now tell us, you have verses on your fingertips. No man now in my family, in a courtyard in Srinagar, can get up and say, ये तो कुरान में लिखा है, ये हदीस में लिखा है, चुप. Nobody can do that, because why? I can pick up those verses and quickly show him the English meaning and say, but this is what the verse says. There is absolutely no explanation for the verse which talks about beating a wife, because there have been so many interpretations, so many apologists saying, no, it's just a light whack. You are supposed to hit by a feather, or वो पुराना दातून होता था, twig, lightly, and not to show any bruises on her face. And I'm like, educated, university educated men pick up this verse, and they have done the utmost atrocious, brutal, assaults on women using these verses. So there is no justification anywhere now, because technology has empowered women. They are going into the text, they are reading the hadith. Fatima Mernasi did a wonderful thing, She went to the original text. She's a Moroccan, and she wrote the male and the whale and the male elite, and picked out two hadiths which were inserted, which are dubious hadiths about the whale. And she quickly got it out. She said, no, this was never part of the Sahih Bukhari. You've just inserted it. And they actually went and studied. If you see Fatima Manasi, she's this bob cut haired, this very modernized woman, right? Then you have Mona Altawi, headscarves and hymens, right? So we could never connect with these. My blog on the hijab is taught in British schools. They have a debate over the hijab, and my blog is shown that this is what a woman in Kashmir wrote, that they were kneecapped and acid attacked. So tell us how this is a choice. This is all possible because of technology.
Digital age. Thank God for technology. A lot of
cons are always there. Even the terror groups are using the same technology. But then, since it's very democratic, and I mean, I am glad that the voices are able to reach out.
Oh, I am so thankful for technology.
I can connect to Iranian women. I can connect to women all over the world.
Yeah. We have almost reached the end of it. We could go for another 24 hours, but we want you to come back also. But I have questions. There are a lot of people who have connected via Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and they're asking tons of questions. I would like you to answer a few. And these are young people who have questions, and I will keep their names. I will not say their names for their own good.
I'll try to answer. I don't have all the answers yet. I am myself a seeker. I'm trying to find solutions and build bridges, but I'll try my best.
Yeah. So there are questions. What are the kind of suppressions that a Muslim women go through in households that the world around them does not get to know? how can non-Muslims help? Because anyone who even attempts to do that is branded an Islamophobe. This discourages support from even well-meaning non-Muslims to Muslim women, because they're immediately branded as Islamophobe, and then they're like, how can non-Muslims really help?
I think the Indian advertising campaign did give an answer to that. I think there was an ad coming about domestic violence. Ring the bell, just ring the bell. You need to intervene. You see a man raising his voice, and it'll be a very short step to hitting her, right? Because remember, he has that justification of religion in his mind that he can hit her. So
Yeah.
ring the bell, intervene. And today you can also tell them that she can file a report. But of course, it has to come from the woman herself also. For Muslim women, it is very tough to speak out, step up. As I said, it's a tribal culture. You will be held guilty for betraying your own. So there are so many things, there. But there is also always a more than 60% chance that she'll get killed. So ring the bell, step in,
Yeah.
because a lot of things happen in the households. A lot of things.
Yeah. Um, Another question is it possible? We've talked about reform and Islam, and we've said that it's not easy, but it can come. It's not impossible, also.
It's not now. It's not
It's not
impossible.
impossible, also.
It will take
Digitization,
time,
digital.
maybe
There was
decades.
a time,
Not
but it's
impossible
not
now.
impossible. It is difficult, but it's not impossible. So, this person is asking, but how can we bring the reform in Muslim society without making changes to the text of the religion? Is it possible?
When changes were already being done, decades ago, also there are so many countries who banned so much. They've banned polygamy, they've banned muta marriage and everything. There were no changes to the text. It's simply that you abrogate some verses. You just discard some verses. Even my time, my grandmothers, they got married at the age of 13. She was my grandfather's fourth wife, right? By the time my mother had just two sisters, two children, and she was married to only one person. I have just one child, and I had a choice in my marriage, and I made it a point to do it when I was very financially independent and pretty mature. So things get discarded along the way. That is what modernization means.
Yeah.
Today you do not chop off hands for thievery, right? Slowly things do change eventually, but the Muslim world keeps taking steps back, as I said, because of Wahhabization, right? We went back many decades. There was a lot of progress that had been made. We don't need to change the text. Judaism hasn't changed the Torah, but today it's a very liberal religion, apart from the Hasidic Jews. Christianity hasn't changed the Bible. The verses are still there about stoning for adultery and homosexuality. They're all there. But it's become a very liberal and elite, religion with a
Fair,
lot of right? So
fair
you
point.
don't need to change the text. You simply
Fair
need to
point.
apply your reasoning,
Yeah.
and you need to take the clergy on board. The ulama have to say कि नहीं नहीं अब ये वो zamana नहीं रहा. That is why we're pressurizing the clergy to come up with those interpretations.
Yeah.
Like I said, opening up the gates of ijtihad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The Arab
Fair point.
Spring was all about that. The Iranian protests are all about that.
Yeah.
Iran is saying we need to go back to what we were, the Great Persia. They
Yeah.
are hailing Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great gave us one of those laws, right? If you read in history. And they are saying that we don't need the kind of Islam that you're bringing in,
So
right?
only in India, a liberal democracy. Otherwise, we don't have uniform civil code, and so therefore Muslims still have their own personal laws whereby they can marry four times, or Muslim girl can be underage and be married. Otherwise, I think the marriageable age is 18 for any non-Muslim girl. So, do you think UCC, which I kind of have a sense that it may be in offing, you think that will help?
It's been very unfortunate that since 1947 there hasn't been any change to the Muslim personal law, whereas a lot of Hindu code bill were added. Right? It's very unfortunate. I'm constantly in touch with people to address this issue. Uniform civil code. What is its form going to be? How is it going to be like? Because I am very mistrustful of whatever the ulama come up with now, at least at this point of time. So there needs to be a lot of discussion. But then I'm also talking to the majority community, and I did have this. I saw this video of Jay Sai Deepak speaking that under this reform of Hindu Marriage Act and Hindu Code Bill, you've taken away a lot of our traditions. So
Yeah.
naturally, the majority community is also going to be very, very mistrustful of what these changes involve.
Hmm.
Because, as I said, there hasn't been any change to the Muslim personal law. I think what we are coming up to now, I think the BJP is going to experiment in one or two states and see, and implement it and see, kind of. I think there has to be a discussion across the board, and the government needs to make it very, very transparent. Invite suggestions, right, as to how it should be like. We did spend a lot of time on drafting the constitution, and it was not done by one man. There were 200, more than 200 people involved. So I think today, in the modern age where you have digital technology, today when citizens are asked for these surveys, online, I think it can be done. I am all for a uniform civil code because, frankly, mercifully, thankfully, the criminal law is the same for everyone in India.
Thank
We
God.
do
Thank
not have,
God. Thank God.
mercifully. Now, the civil law needs to be uniform. It
Yeah.
needs to be uniform.
I mean, when you were
Definitely.
talking
I'm
about
all for uniform, but
soft,
it's not an
soft
easy thing.
bigotry
There
of
needs to be
low
a consensus
when you were
about it.
talking about soft bigotry of low expectations, this is what it is. We are saying,
Yeah.
thank God, criminal law is the same.
Thank God.
Thank God. So this is not.
But
This is.
you would have had beheading chalks, like they have it in Saudi Arabia,
I know.
chopping off hands and mercifully. I don't know what they thought at that time. They could have gone a little bit step further and made it the same for everybody. But I
Yeah.
can understand 1947, Muslim League and the partisan. I mean, they did what they did. They did it. They tried their best. So mercifully, criminal law the
Although
same.
it's coming, blasphemy deaths have happened in India, and as recently as post Nupur Sharma episode, we've seen blasphemy killings. Sartan se juda. I mean, this. Um, it is scary, and the entire thing.
Yes.
These are young people. These are young people. These are not more than 20, 25-year olds who are actually saying gustakhe rasool ki ek saza sartan se juda. And I'm like, how are these
Which
people?
is ironic because the Prophet himself would not have loved it, definitely not supported it.
Yeah,
Which is
but that's
ironic.
not
I mean,
that's
and
not
making the
violence.
faith so weak that
Yeah,
you need to stab a person to defend your faith. How weak is that?
yeah. But it's also conditioning, Arshia. I also have one question, and that's talking about the same thing, that there are women who will tell you that we wear hijab out of our conviction. Or they will tell you that because it's conditioning, right? Or we are beheading somebody out of conviction. We will do it because gustakhi Rasool ki ek hi saza ho sakti hai.
See, I am a liberal. I have no issues if a woman makes an informed choice at the age of 20, 18, 19. That's an informed choice. ऐसा नहीं कि हमारे में wailing नहीं है. But
Yeah.
it used to happen at the age of 40. My mother used to go into etikaf. Etikaf is when you're secluded from society and you just want to pray. You usually do it at the age of 50, menopause के बाद, and you just want to. It's in Hinduism also. After the age of आपको एक संन्यास लेना पड़ता है या आप जाना चाहते हैं, ठीक है? I have no issues of a very mature adult woman making a choice of being in a hijab. It's the conditioning that I'm against, which starts from a very young age, toddlers.
Yeah.
It's the slut shaming of those who choose not to wear it. These are two things that I'm against.
Yeah.
As I said, even if one woman is coerced to wear the hijab anywhere in any part of the world, it doesn't become a symbol of choice. It's going to be a symbol of oppression always. You have to give them the choice of not wearing them.
Yeah.
It's the same in Islam. If somebody doesn't want to believe in, leave it. You can't behead him or kill him. How, as I said, you're weakening the faith. I mean, what good is your faith if you need to stop a person from leaving it by killing him, right?
Blasphemy needs to go if there
It
has to
needs
be
to. It's a
any
medical thing. It
reform.
needs.
Any reform, but I will tell you, and I'm going to end this with this. And as I said, we could continue for another 24 hours, but I want you to come back and have another retail conversation. It's always so wonderful to talk to you.
Always,
But I will
always.
tell you why I
We
called.
are ancient neighbors. As I said,
Yes,
present surprise, ancient
yes,
neighbors.
yes. I'm sure our grandparents and great grandparents have
Ancestors.
known each other.
My
Yeah,
mother was so happy. She said, Acha, she's from the same locality. I said, yes, I'm sure you know the family.
I
Ghasis are a
know.
very, yeah, I had classmates and all. And I'm
Yeah,
sure your family knows mine.
I'm
But
sure.
something which, this is what would have been if things had been normal. We would have
Yeah.
been, great
Yeah.
friends.
But
Yeah.
I'll tell you the closing thing. I will tell you why I called it an impossible battle, although you are always so optimistic. And I love your optimism and I share it. But there are moments when I get, and the reason I call it an impossible battle is look what Qatar has been able to get away with. I mean, they have changed with this FIFA Cup with money. They have literally bribed the entire European world. And now, they've been going, Al Jazeera keeps lecturing us. But of course, Al Jazeera is not going to question Qatari
Qatar.
royal family because they own this thing. But look at how small Qatar is. Such a small Qatar. And look at the footprint it has all over the world. And they are now saying that you cannot have pride, you cannot LGBTQ, and you cannot talk about, no, this is our culture, and you cannot, this is our faith, and you cannot be talking about all this. And they've been able to get away with it because the entire European world and the Western sphere and the entire Anglosphere is in Qatar right now. So clearly
I
they
am
have been
positive
vindicated.
again. I'll tell you why. One thing, it exposed Qatar to what it is, right?
Yeah.
It put a lot of focus on the laborers that have died. It's going to
Mm.
be a big, big human rights issue that Qatar is never able going to be able to wash it away. Secondly, I think Saudi was much more shrewd and clever in recognizing that the oil is going to deplete one day. They will need tourists. That is the reason MBS is making all those changes, and he cannot do it if you have the stringent rules and regulations that Qatar has right now in the World Cup, right? You need tourists, they will need to drink, they will need to eat whatever dietary things they have. You need to be flexible. Jordan is a successful society because it doesn't follow the Wahhabized version. Lebanon was successful for a long time. It was in fact the Paris of the East. Then you have Turkey. No matter how much Erdogan does, Turkey's institutions are so soundly founded on Kemalism, Kemal Ataturk. So the Turkish people are fighting back. So no matter how much he tries, I don't think that's ever going to go. I'm in touch with Turkish friends, and they say no, no way. It does seem like the media reports that the caliphate is winning back and all, but it's not like that. So I'm seeing it in a positive way. The oil is going to deplete one day, and Qatar has been exposed for what it is. They have a very good PR campaign right now, where now we are still being lectured that this is Qatar's rules and regulations, this is Qatar's constitution, you cannot tell us. But see the backlash they face now.
Yeah.
They cannot lecture India now. We have decriminalized same-sex marriages. We are way ahead of them, and look at the inclusiveness that we have. So I'm still taking it in a very positive way. I mean, the Middle East has been forced to confront their regressiveness,
Yeah.
and what better way than a spectacular World Cup,
They have
isn't
spent
it?
billions, some obscene amount of money that I don't even, some
Yes, but in the coming months, a lot
obscene
more is going to
amount of
come.
money on
A lot
this,
more is going to surface.
yeah, on a World Cup. And
MBS still hasn't been able to live down Jamal Khashoggi's murder, right? He still hasn't been able to live, no matter how many changes he makes. Raif Badawi still hasn't got clearance to fly and meet his family. So these are things which are always, always going to hog them down. Always.
yeah, we'll wait. I hope we don't
For
have to
that,
wait. We don't,
India is at its best position. We've just taken over the G20's presidency,
yeah.
right? And you can be assured we are rising. We are
Arshia,
rising.
I just,
Look at the esteem we are being held in. That
yeah,
we bring enemies together. We are talking to everybody. Look at the diplomacy. I mean, I think we are at the highest point now.
I know.
And India
I
has to take
just
pride in the
hope,
liberal democracy it is.
yeah,
India has to take pride that it is one of the safest places for Indian Muslims. All 174 million of them,
yeah,
and they couldn't find it any better, despite what the agenda groups try to portray, the disinformation and the misinformation campaign. It's
and
still the best country to live in. I am so glad I was born in India. So glad my child is going to grow up in a pluralistic India. Very glad about it. Very
yes.
proud about it.
Absolutely. Always proud. Always proud. I just hope we don't have to, Ashia, for our sake, we don't have to wait till the last oil well dries up. I hope the
Well,
reform
it's a
comes before
geopolitical
that.
reality. I'm a very realistic person.
Yeah,
I get these questions. How long will we wait? Why should we wait? But these are geopolitical realities, right?
yeah, yeah.
And remember, like this was one point I wanted to put across.
Mhm.
The Iranians keep complaining about this Washington lobby. that for years and years did not portray the real picture of Iran to the US. I can connect it with Kashmir, right? When this whole thing was happening, the conflict and everything, our own government was deploying the Dullat doctrine. If you remember it, under which Yasin Malik was getting
Infamous,
rehabilitated, state of
infamous
the art
Abdullah
facilities, right? There was this one person who built a career in Indian Express, very famous journalist, who used to run these workshops where there were explicit instructions not to write anything about Kashmiri Pandit exodus, right? You had another one who had a long career with the Hindustan Times, right? And he used to give intellectual cover fire to the terrorists. Unfortunately, got killed by the very same people for whom he had intellectualized terrorism. Why? Because now he had started talking about peace with India, right? So this is it. Take lessons from it. In the end, statecraft has to be for the people. That democracy is for the people, of the people, by the people. You need to keep the welfare of your common people in mind, right? So this is something, and I feel in the Muslim world that Muslims are starting to be resilient among themselves, because again, look at Afghanistan. This is Muslims against Muslims. Iran, again, Muslims against Muslims. In Kashmir, it was Muslims only against Muslims. The Kashmiri Pandits happened to be a side effect of what they wanted to bring in Sharia laws, right, and Islamic Republic of Kashmir. So this is a battle within Islam, and that is what we are fighting for. And इसमें फिर fireworks होंगे, and I don't want to say it, I'm very realistic, but collateral damage तो होता ही होता है. But it's a huge battle, and I think it's about time this battle is fought. And all of these warriors are there. Ayan Hirsi Ali is there, Masih Ali Nijad is there, even Dr. Amina Wadood is there. She's trying to interpret the Quran in a feministic way, right? Nawal al Sadawi was there, of Egypt, right? Very famous. And so many of them. Our very own Hamid Dalwai, and he's my guru, and his Muslim politics in India. This is something that I'm trying to bring it to mainstream, and I hope I succeed.
You will. You will. Anything that one does with conviction, you will always succeed. And that is such a wonderful thing to end today's session on. We always like to end on a positive note. And I'm glad you are, despite everything that you have faced, Arshia, you are always so positive about everything. I know this may not be an impossible battle. We are all allies in this. After all, every person who wants a fair society will have to ally together. We all will have to work on this together. We don't have it's not a choice anymore. It is something that we all will have to fight together. Thank
Mutual coexistence. The pandemic showed us mutual
you.
coexistence.
Coexistence. Yes. Thank you so much for taking time out to be on Epicenter and
Thank
talking
you for
to
having
me.
me.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed our talk.
We'll continue these conversations.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Always.
so much. For all my namaste. For all
Bye-bye.
my audience, thank you so much for being with us, for listening to these conversations. These are not easy conversations. These are not easy topics. But we try to talk about elephant in the room conversations, as I had promised you, because that is where we need to focus on. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the support that you've done. On behalf of my entire team, I want to thank you all, first of all, for being here, and then remind you, please subscribe to us on YouTube. Please subscribe to Epilogue News and Network on YouTube. Press that bell icon, and then follow us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. I am personally on Twitter. Any questions that you have, my handle at Sunanda Vashisht. Do write to me for any future topics that you would like to be discussed, anything that you think the legacy media is not interested in or does not have the expertise to discuss. We'll be happy to discuss it here. Thank you so much for being here. This is Sunanda Vashisht signing off.